Hello and welcome to another video from Fantasy Football Scout. My name is David and today we've got ourselves another episode in our series entitled FPL Scout Report, which is an opportunity for us to have a look at some of the new faces in the Premier League and an opportunity also to have a look at some players who've changed Premier League clubs. Now today we're going to be looking at something slightly different. We've already had a look at a couple of players, some that have joined the Premier League, some that have switched clubs. But today we are going to be looking at someone who is going to be in charge of one of those clubs, and that is Tottenham Hotspur's new manager, Ange Postecoglou. And a lot of you are probably wondering, who is this guy? What's he going to bring to the Premier League? And that very much is the remit for what we are going to look at today. Now, he comes to the Premier League having had some pretty successful time at Celtic. He won 5 out of the possible 6 domestic trophies that he had available to him in that time. And he played some quite attacking football as well. So I think that we can be fairly excited about this, even if he has arrived from a league that we obviously have to say is not as competitive as the Premier League. But there's loads of stuff here. It's very easy to just completely dismiss him at sleight of hand because he's been operating in Scotland. But there's so much that I find very interesting about Postecoglou, which could have a big impact on FPL for the new season. And so we will delve right into to what it's going to mean. And interestingly enough, nobody can summarise this better than Daniel Levy himself, who has done a very good job of sort of almost giving us the contents page for this particular video, the different sections that we've got available to us. So he says that Postecoglou brings a positive mentality and a fast attacking style of play. He has a strong track record of developing players and an understanding of the importance of the link from the academy. Everything that is important to our club. We're excited to have him join us as we prepare for the season ahead. So, a little bit PR there, but that's obviously his job. But I think even Spurs fans who sort of maybe were being pessimistic would say that this is an improvement for Spurs just to even have a manager. Just to have someone who has a philosophy and take the club in a specific direction, you have to say that is probably going to be a good thing. But let's delve right back into his past so that we can get a real good idea of the sort of man that he is on a footballing level and intellectual level. And yeah, what I found interesting about this appointment was that it was a name that I recognised really from the international scene, more so than any sort of domestic scene, because he used to be the Australia manager. When I first joined Scout, actually, it was the first project that me and Neil did together was the 2018 World Cup when he was the Australia manager. And so if you've got a bit of an international footballing awareness, then you might know more about him than if not. So for those of you that don't know too much about him, he spent a lot of his career in Australia. So he led South Melbourne to consecutive National Soccer League titles in 1998 and 1999. But then he went on to work with a lot of the national teams' youth teams for about 9 years, which will become relevant a little bit later when we talk about what he is good at doing in terms of developing young players at clubs. And you can definitely tell that his history there is useful for that, and that could have an impact on FPL, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well. And so he came back to club football in 2008, where he took charge of A-League sides Brisbane Roar and Melbourne Victory, and then went on to become, as I said, the Australian senior team's manager. And so he was there in that post for 4 years. He took Australia to the 2014 World Cup, won the Asia Cup in 2015, and then secured qualification for the 2018 World Cup as well. And so actually fairly decent achievements here, to be perfectly honest, because Australia is a team that usually has to perform above the level of the players in the squad in order for them to achieve something, because they've got a lot of players who come from lower quality leagues, and they usually have to achieve things by being better than some of their parts. That's obviously a nice thing to hear if you're a Spurs fan, if you need a manager to come in and achieve that at your club. And winning the Asia Cup also is no mean feat, because the Asian Football Confederation is a lot more competitive than it used to be, and just even qualifying for the World Cup, to be honest, from that confederation it's in some ways harder, in some ways easier for Australia, since they switched to the Asian Confederation. They previously were just in the Oceanic one. They would always walk the Oceanic one. Teams like Tonga and New Zealand, they could breeze past no problem, and then they would have to play a playoff against a team from another confederation. That was, it's a bit of a cup final, and you've got a lot of things resting on one game. Much rather go and play regular sort of qualification football and qualify through that route. But obviously that comes with facing higher quality teams. They've faced Japan, South Korea, those sorts of teams on a regular basis. And, Saudi Arabia have done quite well of late as well. So this Australian team was brushing shoulders with those up-and-coming teams. And yeah, won the Asia Cup in 2015. So that, I think, is to his credit, to be honest. Then went back to club football again, this time in Japan. And another success story here in that he helped Yokohama F. Marinos win their first J-League title in 15 years. And so much of what we're looking at here, when we look at players, we're very much looking at what they've achieved in other leagues in terms of individual stats. But with the managers, sometimes you have to look beyond the capabilities of the team and look at his personal achievements and how he was able to achieve success in the relative kind of silos of the different leagues. And so winning the Asia Cup with Australia, that's success that, you could argue he had no right to achieve, or at the very least, it was going to be a challenge in a competitive field to win that tournament. And the same with Yokohama as well, not won anything in 15 years in the J-League and then took them to their title. So he has achieved success before, and all of that feeds into his management style, which we're going to talk about in a little bit as well. But the context of when he came to Celtic, I actually think is really interesting, and it's something that has, in many ways, passed me by as someone who's only really a casual observer of Scottish football. And, so then having a look at him in more detail is what's helped me learn this, is that when he came to Celtic, they were at possibly the lowest possible ebb you can be as Celtic, which is having come second in the Scottish Premier League. And when you consider that Rangers were gone from the Scottish Premier League for a very long time, and Celtic dominated the top flight almost to an obscene level for a very long time, to then Rangers sort of turn that round, and then the season before he was there, Rangers won the league by 25 points, which is like just a huge gap. As I said, that's possibly the lowest possible ebb you can get for Celtic. And so he's coming in to this Celtic team with that remit of, you need to sort this out, and you got to do it now. And bearing in mind that you only really knew that much about him if you had a view of international football rather than domestic football, British football, etc., probably didn't really know who he was. And so, this quote we've got on the screen here is something that he said about his appointment before, which was, "Let's not beat around the bush. I was a joke when I was appointed." But in a very short space of time, he has put Celtic firmly back on the pedestal as clearly the best Scottish team. So he got the double of the League and Cup in the first season. Then he got the treble in the season just gone. So that's the Premiership, the Scottish Cup, and the Scottish League Cup. And he really got this Celtic team firing, playing some very exciting attacking football. So what did that mean in terms of numbers then? So in 38 league games, they scored 114 goals, winning 32 of their 38 matches, only losing 3 times. So in terms of what he did in that league, that ability to turn around this team that had underachieved in the previous version of this team, and then immediately take them back to the top. Whilst it is Celtic, yes, and it's easy to do that in the Scottish Premiership, it's that mentality of being able to turn that round that I think is really important here. We have to say that, of course, the Scottish Premier League is obviously a lower standard. And sometimes when we're looking at people who've played in lower quality leagues and potentially sort of walk them a little bit, how they achieved in Europe is quite important. And we have to say that Celtic in Europe, especially last season, it wasn't all that much to write home about. They created plenty of chances, so that attacking football didn't really go away, and there was bright moments. But they only got 2 points in the end in their Champions League group. That admittedly was a hard one because it's Real Madrid, Leipzig, and Shakhtar the next. But they probably would have been hoping they could maybe finish third there and get into the Europa League and maybe go on a bit of a run there, and couldn't quite manage it. So. As I said, we do have to factor that in as well, and that's I'm gonna probably sound like a broken record on a number of occasions here, because there's good things about him, but we always have to sort of caveat it with Scottish Premier League. So I'll try and say that as often as I can to make it relevant without just completely saying the same thing over and over again. And I think we all understand that as well. So but let's talk about his management style, because this is actually probably my favourite part of Postecoglou. Because the way that he conducts himself and the way that he manages players and teams is really fascinating, to the point that he's even had some comparisons with Pep Guardiola, not necessarily in terms of like level of success, because that would just be silly, but it's to do with the way that he's just very uncompromising in his philosophy, and he doesn't really budge from how he wants to play football. And there are some tactical things, which we'll talk about in a minute, that are similar to Guardiola as well. But but he's great for one-liners too. So, that is another thing that just helps with this Guardiola comparison. He's going to be good value in press conferences this year, I'm sure. So make sure you check out Fantasy Football Scout's Twitter account on Thursdays and Fridays for his pressers, because, this is one of my favourite ones. We've already alluded to the fact that he plays quite attacking football. And so when he was asked if he should sacrifice his attacking principles in favour of a more conservative approach, he replied, "My view on that is, if you are a strict vegetarian, you don't drop into McDonald's just because you are hungry, mate. This is what I believe in." I mean, couldn't get more Australian if he tried with that. But, effectively what he's saying is that it's he's going to stick to his guns. He's going to stick to attacking football, even if he's hungry. And that very much is kind of how he manages. He has his set idea of how he wants to operate things, and he will stick to it, which is probably what Spurs need, to be honest. What we've got here is some quotes from some players that he's managed before, and we very much get the vibe here that Postecoglou is very ruthless. He has those principles that he wants his players to put into practice on the football pitch, and if you're not going to do that for him, then he is not going to be happy, even if you're a big name. So James Holland, who is a central midfielder who played for Australia under Postecoglou, said his approach is to not compromise. The word compromise is definitely not in his vocabulary. And slightly more at length here from ex-Brisbane Roar defender Matt Smith, not the guy who used to play Doctor Who, I assume, who knows. Postecoglou's massive strength is his ability to be able to bring players along that journey and buy into what he does, because there's zero tolerance for players that don't want to follow. We were never made to feel comfortable. We were always pushing to be better, always developing, always working harder than any group I've ever experienced before. It didn't matter if you were the biggest player in the dressing room or the youngest. If you weren't pulling your weight or following his principles, he was very ruthless. Now, that is probably magic. Music, I should say, probably music to the ears of Spurs fans, because I think we could probably all agree that one of the things that has let them down as a group in the last couple of years is that just sometimes feel like that as a collective they don't have that bite and that steely determination to hold on and get the results that they need, buy into the manager's what he wants to do on the pitch. And so if anybody is going to help whip these boys into shape and help them to really play for the manager, it sounds like Postecoglou has a real chance of that. As I said, it doesn't in a way necessarily matter that he's been doing that at lower levels, because it sounds like it's how he interacts with people on a human level that is what makes him someone who people are excited about having in the Premier League. And so something else that's really interesting as well is how he conducts himself with the players away from the pitch as well. So he's talked a bit about his own man management style, which I'll just put up on the screen for you guys now, which is really, really fascinating. So he likes to make sure he has quite a healthy distance from his players when it comes to those off-field relationships, because for him, that's what achieves, he's noticed on a human level, that's what's helped him achieve results in the different places that he's managed teams. So of himself, he says, "I don't think any of the players will ever say that they got close to the gaffer. I would never sit down and have a coffee with them. I always like to keep a distance between me and the players. The biggest responsibility I have is to make decisions, and I want to make the best decisions all of the time. It's human nature, if you like somebody, or maybe dislike somebody, that might affect you. I always keep that distance. I'd like to think the players always know I've got their back, and I'll fight for them right until the end. I've always said to the players I take responsibility for all the bad stuff that happens, and I think the players appreciate that. They know where they stand with me." So again, this is the sort of guy that is he just has this understanding of just human interaction. Not that other Spurs managers haven't had it, but it all buys into this culture that he's going to come into Spurs, he's going to have a very set way that he wants to play football, and if you are not bought into that, you're going to get benched, you're going to get put on the subs, you're going to get out of the squad, you might even get sold. Or, for long enough, in terms of players getting out of the squad, long enough it takes them to then eventually buy into it and do what he wants them to achieve. And he's going to help accelerate that process by not being pals with anybody, and but also, by the sounds of it, not winding anybody up either, because he says that he doesn't want them to like or dislike him. Very much just wants to create that aloofness that can sometimes breed respect, which should be, is kind of what Spurs need, isn't it? So, and then the other thing as well that's also quite interesting, we touched on it already, we'll touch on it again, which is how he develops young players. And so Levy's already mentioned it earlier on in this video as well. So this is from Postecoglou himself about developing young players. So I think it's an important part of any club. having players who were brought up with this club is important. I mean, you just have to look at our captain, and this is when he was at Celtic. So it's not just for Callum McGregor, it's for our supporters to know that one of their own has gone from the terraces to on the pitch. It's important, it's a priority that we keep developing our own players. And so if you're having a look potentially at some cheap young Spurs players in the pre-season, it's entirely possible that they could be the sorts of players who a couple of months down the line in the season have actually played quite a lot because he wants to develop them. So it's worth keeping an eye on that, I would say. We're now going to talk about his playing style, which is going to excite a lot of you guys, I think, because very much this is a man who, in his own words, wants to entertain our fans. We want to win. These are the objectives which I always set myself and which I now begin work on. That's what he said as joining Spurs. And so, yep, attacking style football. It's absolutely what Spurs need because they've been so used to this sort of like restrictive sideways passing. You know, let's play really like poorly. Well, not poorly, but just play with no excitement and just grind out results. That is what has been predominantly happening at Spurs. This is an absolute flip in the opposite direction. It's what the fans want. It's probably what the players want too. And he's really going to unleash that attacking hunger. How is he going to do it though? That is the question. And this is where we're going to start to see those comparisons with Guardiola come in once again. And so he typically likes to use a 4-3-3 formation. There's a lot of emphasis on keeping possession of the ball, lots of short passes, and then when they do lose the ball, pressing opponents high up in the pitch and attempt to win the ball back as quickly as possible. So yeah, lots of comparisons there with the way that Man City like to play. But that's not the only area of his tactics where he has emulated Man City. And what's really interesting is that Postecoglou has described himself as a massive fan of Johan Cruyff, famously managed Pep Guardiola when Guardiola was a Barcelona player. And of course, Guardiola has now gone on to manage Man City, who would argue best team in the world right now. So there's a lot of crossover in their football ideology and their philosophies, specifically in this particular area about what he does with his fullbacks. And already I can hear some of you thinking, aha, Spurs fullbacks. I know where he's going with this. Well, here we go. So instead of asking the fullbacks, this is Postecoglou, instead of asking them to stay wide and overlap around the outside, he encourages them to invert, to occupy those central areas, a bit like we've seen with Cancelo at Man City, a bit like Trent at Liverpool, and operate in there, so a little bit closer to the goal, so they're a bit more involved in attacking play, and then by pushing them into those inverted midfield roles, rather than standing somewhere wide and maybe picking up a man marker from the other team, it sometimes creates this space because the other team are like, oh, well, there's no one in that space, so I'm not going to go and mark it. And so then those inverted fullbacks can then push into those wider areas from the middle at points in time where it's more disruptive for the other side because they haven't decided to go and man mark. Because obviously someone who, if you're going to man mark a fullback that's gone on, that's probably going to be maybe a winger or maybe a similarly placed defender on the other team. Those guys cannot go and mark the guy if he's in possession in the middle of the pitch. So it just creates that dynamic that allows them to burst into that space that's been opened up. And so what we've got on the screen is a heat map from Greg Taylor, who was the left back for Celtic the most recent season. And this heat map is brought to you from SofaScore, so do check them out for heat maps of players from other divisions. If you want good heat maps of Premier League players, of course, you guys know the best place to get that is on fantasyfootballscout.co.uk. But yeah, let's have a look at this. And wow, I mean, this heat map is very exciting. We have to caveat it, of course. Here I go again, talking about the Scottish Premier League, Scottish Premiership, I should say. So we have to consider that, and Celtic obviously are going to find it very easy to dominate possession in that league. But this is a good way of looking at what his intentions are for his fullbacks, because you have to say that this looks like the cross between a number 8 and a wing back, whereby you've got lots of touches down the left-hand side all the way into the corner, penalty box entries in what I like to call the Andrew Robertson zone, which is right near the dead ball line as the penalty box intersects with the dead ball line, and it'll cut back in, pull it across. Healthy amount of penalty box touches elsewhere in the box, but so much red and yellow and orange in that number 8 space, operating between, in a sort of box-to-box role, and that's a left-back. And so in terms of his stats then, Greg Taylor, very, very effective in the attacking third, as you can see. He had 3 goals and 4 assists from 28 starts. He averaged 0.7 shots per game, 1.3 key passes per game. And so involved was he in the build-up for Celtic because of that inverted fullback role, that he ended up quite often in a lot of Celtic games, he would be the player with the most touches than any other player. And of course, touches and passes and all these sorts of things do factor into bonus. So it's making us feel like Spurs fullbacks, if they adopt this kind of role, which they could do because Postecoglou clearly likes it, could be very exciting. And so probably the best way of just describing just how dangerous this can be for other teams, we actually have a quote here from Billy Dodds, who's the Inverness manager, talking about just how horrible it is having to face this style of football. And so he's speaking here just after Celtic beat his Inverness team in the Scottish Cup final, where he said, "I think you see the type of product that Postecoglou brings. You see Klopp at Liverpool when he plays those inverted fullbacks. I had to handle them on Saturday. Taylor at times was playing as a centre forward. So was Johnston. That's the right back for Celtic, but maybe not as high as Taylor." So clearly there's a slight imbalance there. Taylor's a bit more advanced than Johnston on the other side, but clearly a very big emphasis on those fullbacks being a big part of the build-up and contributing to attacking play. And so that is probably one of the most defining factors of how he's managed up till now, could manage when he comes to Spurs. So let's talk about Spurs then. We have to talk about the context. We have to talk about what he is inheriting and where his style could fit in and what that's going to mean for fantasy Premier League managers at the end of the day. So him being a 4-3-3 manager should mean that no more back three at Spurs, which is probably a good thing for them, really. And so what we can probably expect to see is a return to the four-man backline. And what's really interesting is something that you'll pick up if you've had a read of this fantastic article on Fantasy Football Scout, the website that is. The editorial branch of our content on Postecoglou, is that actually in the last two matches of the season, when Spurs did go back to a back four under Ryan Mason, who, by the way, is staying at the club, which is probably a good thing because he knows the players. So there'll be an element of what he's done in the last few weeks that might, form the basis of Postecoglou and what he does. So they moved back to the back four, 3.99 expected goals tally across the last two games when they did that, which is actually the second highest in the league. Now, could take that with a pinch of salt, potentially, because it's just last two games. Some teams on the beach, etc. Man City certainly were, or rather, they weren't on a beach. They were getting ready for the Champions League. But, certainly some improvement when they switched to a back four. So we can already see that a switch to a back four could help them, for sure. And you'd have to expect, really, that if you've got a team that has, for the majority of the season, played this restrictive style of football, where they're not really going there to play attractive football, they're just going there to grind results out, to then switch from that to a very attack-minded manager. In theory, they should score more goals, but we do have to remember the big caveat here, and it's kind of the thing that could potentially, maybe make or break Spurs' season, is what happens with Harry Kane. Now, it's not, in no way, in my opinion, is it a surefire thing what's going to happen with him. I think that he could stay, he could go to Real Madrid, he could go to another Premier League team. It's impossible really to predict what's going to happen. In terms of Real Madrid, they've got a very attractive offer there. They can say, "I'll pay you 100 million from now, and you don't have to," rather than us get him off you for free next summer, and you don't have to sell him to a Premier League team. And of course, to the player, you're going to play every game because Benzema's just left. That's quite an attractive offer. Now, in terms of what the player wants, though, I think everybody knows that he wants to try and break Alan Shearer's Premier League record, the goal-scoring record. So best way for him to do that is to stay in the league. So his choices are really to either stay at Spurs or maybe go to a Man United. Probably can't go to City anymore because he wouldn't start every game. So it's just my personal opinion, but I think it's United or Spurs for him next season. And what will be interesting will be what impact Postecoglou's arrival will have on him. Because... if Postecoglou can encourage him to buy into what he's going to do to the club, and it's impressive enough in Harry Kane's mind that it convinces him that it's actually going to make a difference and they might win something, then maybe he's going to stay. You could probably argue that he's probably more likely to win something if he goes to Man United. But we'll have to see. Whatever happens with Harry Kane, whoever is going to be the centre forward at Spurs, I think is going to have quite a good season, because when you look at what Postecoglou has done with Celtic centre forwards of late, and centre forwards kind of throughout his career, he builds very attacking minded teams, and he builds them all around centre forwards that are going to put things away. And so he very much knows how to get that centre forward firing. So Celtic striker Kyogo Furuhashi scored 20 goals in 33 appearances in his first season with Celtic, and then the season that's just finished, he was the Scottish Premiership's top goal scorer with 27 goals, won the PFA, Scottish Premiership, Scottish Football Writers Association Player of the Awards. It's just everything. He just pretty much just won everything. Was the best player in the Scottish Premiership this year, and so whether or not it's going to be Richarlison, whether it's going to be Kane, we don't know, but he's very much going to work with whoever that centre forward is and hope to bring out their best. And as I've said before, it's all sort of relative because yes, he's been in a league of a lower quality, but some of this stuff is about how he can connect with people on a human level and work out how to manage individuals. And a lot of what I see, I think, is quite impressive. So I kind of feel like whoever the centre forward at Spurs is going to be this season could have a good season. In terms of what he's inheriting, it might be very, very different to the Spurs squad as we know it now. So this is something else to consider as well in whether or not Postecoglou is going to have a positive effect. David Raya, it looks like he's going to sign for Spurs imminently. And I'm recording this on Tuesday and it's going out on Wednesday, so it's entirely possible that you're watching or listening to this and Raya is already a Spurs player from what I'm seeing anyway. That would be a big thing for them because we've got a ball-playing goalkeeper who's very good at distributing the ball. That's going to help them with their build-up for this attacking play, so you would have to say that him coming to the club does probably help improve their attacking credentials. And of course, done very well defensively this year, lots of saves, and so could potentially shore them up at the back. Potentially, we're going to talk about that in a minute because Postecoglou likes attacking football, and let me tell you that. Then James Maddison also sort of being talked about. One thing you would say that Spurs haven't really had in a while is someone who's individually in that team designated as the creator. In my personal opinion, they haven't really replaced Christian Eriksen yet, to be honest. I can't really think of many people that have gone in and done that number 10 role quite to his level. Maddison could be that player that they need with that in that regard. So those signings, they come off, then maybe he starts to be building something that might convince Harry Kane to say. I don't know. But you've all been thinking it. You've all been thinking it since I talked about inverted fullbacks. And here we are. I will finally say his name, Pedro Porro. He is someone who I think that you absolutely have to have on your FPL radar, knowing that Postecoglou is going to be the Spurs manager for the new season. Because, let's be honest, he was already looking pretty exciting anyway. But if Postecoglou is going to come in and implement that inverted fullback system as part of his 4-3-3, 4-3-3 sort of out of possession and then shift to something else, a bit more asymmetrical when they're in possession, Pedro Porro could go to a whole nother level in terms of attacking returns because he hasn't been playing in that sort of role. But since making his debut in Gameweek 23, he's ranked third amongst all FPL defenders for expected goal involvement. So huge potential there already. He was a massive part of the final day of the season, Gameweek 38. He got some attacking returns there, and possibly even the reason why I didn't finish in the top 10k. So thanks, man. But yeah, he's very much on my radar for the new season, and anyone else who's going to be playing in those fullback roles is on my radar. But I think the price maybe just might have an impact here because, as you well know, if you are a vegetarian, just because you're hungry, that's not an excuse to go to McDonald's. That's what Postecoglou lives by, and what he means by that is he does not compromise his attack for the sake of his defence. And so, bearing in mind that their defensive record was rubbish last season, they were 6th worst in the Premier League, and Spurs defenders, you did not own them for their defensive potential. The one thing that I would say probably isn't going to improve drastically, even having David Raya around, this team could very much be exposing itself to conceding a lot of goals, and very much the way that he likes to play is, to quote Vindaloo, score one more than you. So I think this is a team that will probably be winning games 4-3, 3-2, that sort of thing, rather than grinding out clean sheets. Do have to maybe factor that in when we're talking about how excited we are about Pedro Porro, but I just think anytime we get wind that there's going to be an inverted fullback in FPL, we just have to be quite excited. So yeah, we should also talk about Son and Kulusevski as well, because Postecoglou does quite like his wingers to be attacking rather than sort of tracking back as well. All feeds into that attacking mentality, and so yeah, that very much could help them do particularly well if he's going to take away any of their defensive concerns and make them more attacking players. Could see Kulusevski come back onto the FPL radar. But one final time, before we talk about pre-season, I will just caveat it one more time about the Scottish Premiership and what that means for a lot of this stuff, is that, we have seen managers do very, very, very well in the Scottish Premiership and then come down to England with not a top team, and then sort of struggle to replicate that levels of success. Brendan Rodgers did do well at Leicester for the most part, but obviously didn't turn them into a team that was dominating the league as Celtic were. And of course, you have to say the way that petered out was Brendan Rodgers was in charge for most of the season, where Leicester went down when they really shouldn't have done, for example. And then, of course, Steven Gerrard at Aston Villa as well did very well with Rangers, and didn't really ever really get the ball rolling at Villa. And of course then a bigger names come in with a lot of European experience and Premier League experience in Unai Emery, and taken them on to where they were hoping to achieve with Steven Gerrard. So that could happen at Spurs. My personal opinion is I like a lot of what Postecoglou sort of emanates as a person in terms of how he communicates, how he manages people, and he just seems to have this X factor, this sort of steely determination that makes me feel like he will improve this Spurs team somehow. I don't know how, because lots up in the air about Kane and a few other things, but something about him just helps me feel like there will be times this season where they're going to be playing really exciting football with some really nice fixtures, and that's going to mean good things for Spurs players. But all of those things that are up in the air, I will have to point you guys to the Fantasy Football Scout preseason page, because that is going to help answer a lot of those questions. Now, first things first, we've got fixtures coming soon. So if you're watching this before the fixtures, then join us at 9 o'clock on Thursday to find out who's got the best and worst fixtures for the Premier League season, because that's coming up. If you're watching this afterwards, go back and have a look at who's got the best fixtures. There will be analysis of the best and worst fixtures at the start of the season on the Fantasy Football Scout preseason page, which you can find at the top of the site under the top tabs. What we will also find there is a complete guide to every team's preseason campaigns, which include the fixtures that they're playing in, and then within that, who's scoring the goals, who's getting the assists, and crucially, who's playing in what position and for how long. So the preseason minutes page, you're probably fed up of me talking about, because I talk about it all the time, but it's something that will help you discover those hidden gems before your friends do, because famously Wan-Bissaka, John Lundstrom, both discovered by that spreadsheet. So it will be keeping track of everything, and that is what will help you see whether or not Postecoglou has gone all in on putting his 4-3-3 formation into effect with those inverted fullbacks, and what that means for Pedro Porro, what it means for their defence. If they go through those preseason games, which are actually against good opposition, West Ham, Leicester, Roma, if they go through those games and they keep a couple of clean sheets, then maybe it really is going to be time for Pedro Porro. If they go through those games and they don't keep and they concede a load of goals because he doesn't want his vegetarians eating McDonald's, then again, you'll know that once you've had the opportunity to see him get to grips with that Spurs team. So do keep an eye on that. It will be very, very important. So that brings us to the end of this video. I hope that was helpful for you guys. Lots to go through. A lot of it's theoretical, I know. A lot of it involves taking someone from a very poor quality league to a very high quality league. We'll know more in a few weeks' time. We'll certainly know more when the season gets underway. But hopefully it was helpful to point you guys in the right direction for what you need to be considering for your Game Week 1 teams. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so that, if you like this content, then we know that we should be making more of it. And don't forget to hit the bell notification as well, because especially during the summer, when there's no deadlines, you're going to need that bell notification to know there's content to check out. So make sure you've ticked that. But yeah, with that, I will leave you fine folks to enjoy the rest of your summer, and I will see you next time.